This is the second part of the session. The previous session focused on rural areas, which we call as the source of climate change induced migration. And in this particular session, we'll be talking about urban areas. We have a very esteemed set of panelists with us. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Deepika. I work with Indian Institute for Human Settlements, IIHS. We are one of the co-organizers for these two panel discussions. So I would like to invite our esteemed panelists and request them to please come here. Uh, we'll start with Professor Bhagat. Professor Bhagat was professor and head at the Department of Migration and Urban Studies at International Institute for Population Sciences, Mumbai. He is currently honorary visiting professor at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics at Pune, and he's also a visiting professor at the School of Development Studies at TIS Mumbai. Sir has published more than 200 papers, mainly on migration and urbanization, and on sustainable development and demography. I would also like to invite Divya Verma. Divya is the co-founder and the director policy and practice at Work Fair and Free, which is a knowledge institution which works on how informal labor migration can become more secure and more dignified. Divya comes from a long experience of policy analysis, research, and advocacy. She was also a member of a Niti Aayog Committee on Labor Migration. Welcome, Divya. I would like to invite Dr. Peter Benoy. Dr. Benoy is an expert on labor migration in India. He is the co-founder and executive director of CMID, Center for Migration and Inclusive Development, which is the co-organizer for these two panel discussions. Uh, his work has covered inclusion of migrant workers in India's policy framework. He has also advised on Bangladesh's national strategy on internal displacement. So overall, between us, we have several years of experience on migration, on demography, and understanding urbanization, and linking all of them to issues around land. Thank you, and welcome to all the panelists. So we'll keep the format of the discussion same as the previous session. I invite the three panelists one by one to put forward their introductory opinions on the topic. The context is pretty much already out there. And then we'll do a round of questions to the panelists and then invite questions from the participants. Professor Bhagat.
So, first of all, I like to thank IIHS CMID for inviting me on this occasion. And in the first session, it was very interesting and it covered aspects of rural area. And this is on urban. I think urban is very, very important. So I will begin saying that urban or urbanization is something, is a relationship between people and place. Place is very central idea in the process of urbanization, and place is part of space. So that's how space becomes very important. How spaces are made, formed, produced. And if I bring the issue in relation to land, so land is about or for rural and space is for urban. So when we look at land, land is limited. But is there a limit of space? And that is the important part, how urbanization is producing space. How urbanization is converting land into space and something space which has no limit. Like there is no limit of GDP, there is no limit of space. And how GDP is connected with production of space. That is, I think, very, very important how urbanization is producing space and places. And there is a contradiction between space and place. Are we able to make place, or we are only producing space? So when we look at land, how land acquires value, economic value, and then land is converted into space. It can go high rise, it can go vertical. Space can be anywhere. One can have settlement in the sea, or one can have a floating city. in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean. That's how space doesn't have a limit. Whereas, so the crucial question is, it is urbanization means land right versus space right. So I like to put it in this way: land right versus space right. Now it is the time to raise the question of space rights, how spaces are produced, and then how wealth is created. Definition of wealth, definition, source of income. So space becomes a place where wealth is created. And wealth is created through the process of urbanization, where land is transformed into space. So, and it acquires value. So land is there. The moment there is a railway station or there is an airport, land, it becomes space, land becomes space, and you can further produce it, and there is no limit. And that's why this is how it comes connected with GDP. Now GDP has no limit, but then GDP keep on it takes place, increasing production takes place, there should be increasing consumption. And therefore, there should be increasing trade. Somebody should consume. And then the concept of space is connected with concept of time. How we are circulating. So urbanization is about the mobility. And mobility means mobility of goods and services, mobility of capital, mobility of human beings, that is migration. And then the biggest and very fastest is about the information, that the digital evolve. Now in this motion, is there a limit of motion? Is there a limit of speed? Einstein imagined, okay, light has is the largest speed. But then we are also trying to reach that one. Because more GDP means you have to produce more, time should be shortened. And that is why this entire process of space production is related with time-space compression. Time-space compression means produce space, shorten time through technology, increase GDP. Where it is taking place? It is taking place through urbanization. So this is urbanization is basically how spaces and places are transformed through technology. Wealth is created, and when this wealth is created, now the question is how wealth is distributed. That is fundamental thing of inequality. So inequality, when economists try to understand, sometimes we ignore this aspect that yes, what are the spatial processes that creates inequality, because space is not only wealth, it is a means of production. Land is vast, but now the space is means of production. So it is both a means of production and product, and who is now controlling and commanding that product. So that's how whole political aspects are also included with that, inequality, etc. So this is how urbanization should be looked into as a process which produces space. But place is something related with human being, where we have a history, we have a culture, we have various aspects where we are connected with nature. So we are destroying place, but we are creating space. And that's how the climate change and the environmental degradation should be looked. So the future question is how to make a place. Maybe it has different scale. Maybe a village can be a place, a town can be a place, a nation can be a place, and entire global level, it can be a place. So this is how urbanization should be looked into in the present day, but urbanization has been processed throughout in history. It's not something, it is the result of a very recent time linked with industrial revolution, but earlier also, in ancient time also, since the time of Neolithic time, urbanization was there. Because it is a characteristic of place, how places are produced, the wealth is produced, political power is produced. So, and then technology has shaped throughout history, the various forms of urbanization. So urbanization will continue to remain. It is not that 100% urban, it will become 100% urban, and then there is a stop of urbanization. No, it is not a finite process. It is only finite process when we define rural and urban in our censuses. But then how we are producing space and place, that is very, very important. The production of space and place is connected with our how we widen our freedom and fraternity, and then the question of central question of equality and inequality. If you see in today's world, you cannot understand inequality unless understanding the role of the big cities. And where? So 2 minutes, yes. So now time is limited. I will raise three important questions. One is that uh, what is urban is not municipal. So everything urbanization taking place, because urbanization is production of space and municipalization is something we are related with government, people. So municipal coming role of the government. So what is the role of the government? How municipal is being created? Now, municipal, when it is municipalized, we are entering into the relationship with the state. But it does not mean every municipal is a good. But that is how people and place relationship enters into the another category, that is space. That is one question. The second already that I have discussed about land rights versus space rights. And third important question, when we enter into the relationship with the space, with the state, then the question of rights becomes important. What is state? State is something, embodiment of relationship between people and government, where the territory is there, where population is there, where sovereignty is there. And this is being, this relationship must ensure freedom, equality, and fraternity. And therefore, citizens' right becomes very important. Are we citizen? Are the migrant citizens? So that's who are producing the cities. I said cities are creating wealth, but who is producing the city? Throughout history, if you see, cities are created by migrants. Who are the natives? Natives are the old migrants. Those who came earlier in the city, they said, no, this city belongs to me. But they were also, if you look at those who are claiming that they are natives, their forefathers also came. Whether you take it Mumbai or take it Pune, anywhere. So this is how citizenship right becomes important. Then citizenship right versus labor rights, if you see, labor rights and say informal sector, etc., we keep on talking. Well, it has no meaning at the moment. Let me tell you, talking about informal sector. Why? 90% workforce is in the informal sector. Everything getting informalized. Informality is not important. What is important is the precariousness. Precarization is now the most important thing that is affecting the life of the people, and particularly those who are young people. Even after PhD, students are precarious, not getting security, not a stable job. So informality coupled with precarization, that is, I think, the most challenge. And then here is the question of citizenship right becomes very important. Thank you very much. I will stop.
Thank you, sir, for laying out the framework within which we can carry forward the rest of the discussions. Thank you for making the distinction that how we visualize land in rural areas is very different from how we visualize it in urban areas, and for laying it out to us that equality, rights, including labor rights, and precarity are things that we need to discuss whenever we are talking about these issues. Divya, I would welcome you to put forward your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Deepika. And thank you to IIHS and CMID for inviting me to be here. I think it's a very important and a pertinent topic right now. And my own work has been in the area of informal labor migration, both in the sending regions as well as in the receiving regions. So, of course, Professor Bhagat has laid down this very broad canvas within which we can speak. So, based on my experience, I'll try to highlight some of the core challenges that we see labor migrants experiencing in the cities, and then zoom out a little bit to talk about what are some of the structural issues that are driving the issues related to housing and land that migrant workers especially, experience in urban areas. So I think the previous panel has really, talked very eloquently about how the degeneration of land ownership and rural livelihoods really trigger a vast majority of people to move from rural areas to urban India. And today we see that the magnitude is as big as 140 million people, which is, huge numbers of people that we are talking about, who are really outside the scope of any kind of policy making today in the country. And a vast majority of these are seasonal circular migrants. That is, people who might not really have the aspiration to actually settle down in urban areas, but they keep moving from rural and urban areas, coming back to the source. So, leading in a sense what we call as translocal lives. So, they're really invested in both source as well as destination kind of regions. And one important thing to note again, which was highlighted in the last panel as well, is that a lot of these seasonal migrants are disproportionately from marginalized communities, SC and ST communities, and they work in very, very informal, precarious kind of work environments that Professor Bhagat was also talking about. Of course, being violated of labor rights is a very daily reality, daily lived reality that a lot of migrant workers, face in the city. For example, wage theft, being outside the ambit of social protection, being engaged in very hazardous, risky, precarious kind of work environments, especially in a scenario where labor governance has completely failed them. There's no way to really access any kind of, redressal, legal redressal if a violation of labor rights occurs with a migrant worker. But coming to the more sort of pertinent issue here today, which is on the living conditions of migrant workers, in our experience, there are broadly three kinds of typologies or housing choices that we see migrant workers undertaking in cities. One is, living in completely open spaces, that is, besides railway tracks, underneath flyovers, living in open lands, still paying nominal amounts of rent, about 500 rupees, 1,000 rupees to landlords, just in exchange for being on those lands. And these might be people who might not have even secure titles. The landlords themselves are sort of proxy in nature. They themselves might not have secure land titles to any of these areas that they're actually renting out. The second is, of course, being part of congested urban slums, where again, the facilities that they get in exchange for very high premiums is very, very suboptimal. For example, access to water is not guaranteed, or toilets. Same for people living in open spaces. We see a lot of women who have to get up as early as 3 a.m. in the morning to go out and relieve themselves in the open, because before the city actually wakes up, because they don't have access to guaranteed water or sanitation facilities. And we often see that migrants end up paying the per capita amount for water or for rent or for electricity, for very unreliable access that migrant workers end up paying is much higher than what an average urban, middle class or upper middle class person might be paying. The third category is, of course, people who are living inside the work sites, inside construction sites, inside hotels and restaurants, inside factories, who are completely then again invisible to the policy making spaces or to urban urban local kind of bodies. So, I think the broader point that I want to make here is that the urban policy paradigm in the country is largely blind and insensitive to the needs of seasonal migrants in the city. They are the ones who come to the city every year, power the engines of the city, but their needs are not really accounted for at all. They are not thought of as a legitimate constituency that is in need of urban public services. So I think that's a big sort of a policy blind spot that we are experiencing, especially in the urban policy making scenario today. Secondly, of course, a major structural reason is that a lot of migrant workers are excluded from enumeration and estimation at different levels, starting from the census and the National Sample Survey, which is not really figured out a way to capture seasonal migration. Even city level mapping exercises do not really classify migrant settlements or consider them as part of their city plans. So what happens as a result is that they're completely left out of the scope of urban planning processes. When water lines are laid, or when sewage lines are laid, they are outside the fiscal resources that are deployed for such facilities in the city today. Thirdly, an important aspect is also that there is a lot of dichotomy between urban governance systems and labor governance systems. So when a migrant worker comes to the city, who is responsible for providing public provisioning to them? Is it the employer and the contractor, or is it the urban, municipal local body? That kind of a dichotomy still exists, and the policy makers are not very clear, or at least the policy paradigm today is not very clear about who the actual accountability lies with. So it's very easy to wash their hands of this seasonal temporary population who comes to the city regularly but cannot stake any kind of claims, is not part of any kind of claim making process to the urban kind of amenities today in the city. Of course, we see, especially like I live and work in Bangalore, and in a lot of the recent development that we see in Bangalore and in other cities like Pune, a lot of industrial expansion is happening in the urban peripheries. As a result, what happens is that this also kind of spills over to contiguous rural areas. So again, the whole question of governance of public provisioning for migrants becomes very muddled, because rural areas, all these big industrial parks exist in rural taluks where the panchayats don't have the mandate or the capacity or the systems to provide large scale public provisioning. Like, for example, these are filthy areas, very unsanitary for living and disproportionately occupied by migrant workforce who come there and live there. Lakhs and lakhs of people who come from all parts of the country and work in Bangalore in the peripheries. So I think these are some of the complexities that really drive the experiences of migrant workers. This is, of course, circumscribed by the fact that migrant workers do not have a political voice in the city. They don't have voting rights, so there's no political leveraging that can happen for them to stake claims to some of these resources in the city. So what they rely on is very informal networks with other urban poor. Like, for example, they set up relationships with the watchman of an apartment complex or the security guard of a park, so that every day they have access to things like water. They're able to access toilets in the parks or in the apartment complexes. So it's a network of simultaneous patronage and exploitation that the watchman also charges a hafta or a commission in exchange for letting them use these services. So I think it's a complex sort of interplay of different stakeholders who have different incentives in their engagement with migrant workers. So just to conclude, I would just like to say that going forward, it's really imperative that the urban planning process in the country is sensitive to the needs of migrant workers and considers them a critical, legitimate constituency that is in need of some of these urban public services. Of course, climate change and scorching heats, heat waves, lack of drinking water access, all of this is also impacting migrant workers on a large scale, especially because our cities are becoming more and more concretized. The groundwater resources are not getting recharged. So I think this is disproportionately again affecting urban peripheries and availability of public provisioning there, where migrant workers live in huge industrial sort of dense kind of clusters. So I think so again, that's why it's important for urban planning processes to take into account the needs of this unique category, which only then can make urban planning, urban development more participatory, more resilient, because this is a community whose presence in the cities is not going to stop. I think it's irreversible now. The kind of magnitude at which labor migration is happening in the country today is irreversible. So it's imperative that the policymakers take into account the needs of this community, ensure that enumeration happens, and ensure that enumeration of migrant settlements happen at all levels, starting with the city level right up to the national level. It's also important that social rights are delinked from domicile status. Sedentary bias is another issue. Where when they don't have domicile status in the city, they are not able to claim a lot of the universal social rights. So it should be delinked from, as an Indian citizen, they should not be asked to prove their reason for existence in the city over and over again for different schemes and different kind of programs. So I think delinking that from the tenure in the city, their domicile status, their employment status in the city, is very important. And of course, it's important that employers and the state take responsibility equally for the provision of public services. And for that, it's also important that urban local bodies are able to have more control over their resources and have more control over their processes of planning, so that resources can be really utilized according to the migration flows in their particular context. So if a metro construction is happening and there are lakhs of migrant workers coming into a city, the urban local bodies should have resources at their disposal to really tailor the urban plans according to the needs of this vast population. So, so I'll stop here and open to more questions.
Thank you, Divya. Also, thank you for staying in time. Dr. Binoy, would you like to talk about how can cities be made more inclusive to these migrant workers?
Thank you. I think globally cities are becoming more and more exclusionary. And you see that the way in the United States elections, the extreme far right, influence is getting very, very clearly prominent. I think this happens all over the world. So when there is a decline in fertility and mortality, the population composition is decided by in-migration or out-migration. So it is now globally, migration is deciding the global politics. So obviously that is why the extreme right wings are prominent in most of the advanced economies where we all thought they were all very inclusive. So I think this is a setting where we are discussing migration and inclusive, migrant inclusive governance or development in Indian cities. To me, broadly, the urban poor is none other than the rural poor who has migrated to the cities for a livelihood. And connecting land, then migration and climate change, I think there is hardly anything left after two experts already discussed this in detail. So I would touch upon the broad streams of migration and how people are different. So in these streams are different. Primarily, there is this forced migration and voluntary migration. Now, the people who are forced to migrate are much more vulnerable in the cities compared to those who migrate voluntarily. Particularly the case of refugees. So if people, and in the case of housing and land, it is very particular in the case of refugees. People from other countries who have come with hardly any right, not even recognized by the UNHCR, because India is not party to most of the regulations or provisions for the welfare of the refugees. So if we consider the cities or the migrants in the cities, the refugees are the most vulnerable people in any of the Indian cities in terms of their access to housing or access to livelihood, access to justice, or everything. So then comes internally displaced people. So we have a lot of people who are displaced due to several reasons, including impact of climate change. So these people are many a times these are people who are not able to exercise any choice in terms of taking up a livelihood in a destination. In fact, in Kerala, we even have traditional fishers from Sundarbans coming and working in the marine fishing. So in the deep sea trawlers, it's mostly we have traditional fishers from 5 Indian states working in Kerala in just that sector alone. So, this is the case of forced migration. So internally displaced people or refugees are the most vulnerable in terms of any entitlement of a migrant. And primarily in India, migration is a fundamental right, which most of us do not recognize. So you have a right to move, reside, and work in any part of the country, which when it comes to migrants, you are treated as second-class citizens. Now, among the voluntary migrants, I mean, there is this permanent migrants and temporary migrants, those people who come and settle, like most of us who come to the city and settle, and those who uh, come for work because there is anything that they are able to take up at the native places. So Professor Bhagat and one of his students has done a study which very clearly articulates that the migration of the landless, the BPL or the people who are into agriculture is 10 to 15 times larger compared to the migration of the others. And as Divya mentioned, most of these people are from Adivasi, Dalit or religious minority communities who take up the vocations that the natives generally tend to avoid. Now, when it comes to housing, what is affordable to migrants is a question. So most of these people prefer not to come to the cities and work. From our research, what they say is if they get a monthly regular income of 10 to 15,000, most of these people do not wish to come to the cities. But it is obvious that they will have to come to the cities. And in our recent study in Ganjam with Gram Vikas, in a block called Surada, the average local income in the native place is 1,500 rupees, with which how will a family survive? It could also be because of a heavy migration that there is hardly anyone to work in the. And the migration rate is, you wouldn't believe, it's 74%. So 7 out of every 10 household has a migrant, and 18 crores is monthly remittance to that particular block alone. So this is the level of migration in many parts. So the maturation of migration differs by the composition of the people in the source areas. Like say Kalahandi, it is more relatively of a recent origin compared to Ganjam, where there is a historical level of migration. Now, when these temporary migrants come to the city, it's only a minority who would want to claim a permanent housing. Whereas most people require temporary housing, which is not considered generally in the urban planning. And now, where do people live? What is available for these people? It's hardly, I mean, there is this affordable rental housing scheme which we talk about, but there is hardly any uptake in the country on this affordable rental housing in any of the Indian cities. And whatever affordable rental housing is there goes to the natives in some form or the other. I think somebody was talking about the Maharashtra example, where such dwelling units go to natives compared to the others. Now, what is available is vacant places or places which are highly vulnerable to impact of climate change. One other factor which I wanted to tell or highlight here is, irrespective of climate change, labor migration will increase, because the youth obviously wouldn't want to stay in the villages and do agriculture at the rate of say 200 rupees or 300 rupees. If there is a potential of quick intergenerational social mobility, if there is a quick money, youngsters will obviously go for that. So irrespective of an impact of climate change, people are going to migrate. Now, where do they go? They can only come to the cities. And how do we ensure housing for these people? So there are different type of migrant communities. Like there are families, more and more families are now migrating compared to, and they're traveling 2,000, 3,000 kilometers to come to destinations. And if you ask most of the migrant workers, how long would you plan to stay at a destination? They would say, we are undecided. And staying at a particular destination is also not decided. So this, depending on their ethnicity. So what we see is from Orissa, the OBCs go to Gujarat, whereas the SCs, STs, and Christians come to southern Indian states. So there is a clear there are clear markers of how migration is evolving. So obviously, when we come to the right to the city, there is hardly any such right currently available, primarily because of documentation related to their existence in the city. So most of these people, while as Divya mentioned, are paying much higher rent rates than many of us are paying when we convert it into a per capita rent. At the same time, almost 90-95% do not get any documentation of such a rental agreement. So even if they have been there for say 10 years or 15 years, there is no document to prove their existence in the city. So as a result, when it comes to housing, even if they would like to buy a piece of land, it's almost impossible. When people are landless, and we have also seen that when they come to the cities, and if there is a case, and the court asks even for a bail, they have to show the pata related documents, which they cannot produce. So there are so many issues related to their invisibility in the city, right from the existence or their duration of residence or even residence in the city. So which in turn will exclude them from almost all the schemes of the urban local body, which they would first want a certificate from the ward councillor to show that, okay, this person has been residing here for so many years. So the exclusion related to housing starts with such proving their existence in the city. And when it comes to living in open spaces, there is hardly very few choices for these people. So they live in open areas, and if they live in open areas, their housing can be very minimal, primarily because anytime it can be evicted. If they invest substantially, this money is going to go for a toss the moment the corporation vehicle comes and then takes away all their belongings. So they use minimal material or minimalistic stuff, because once in a few weeks or months it happens. I witnessed it in Trombe, many societies. So in terms of expectation from the government, we all know that government wouldn't be able to provide housing to everybody, and that is not expected also. But at the same time, government can play as a regulator, which is not happening even in the city. So if there is a way government is able to, or the urban local bodies are able to regulate the rent or intervening in terms of ensuring affordable housing for migrants, that will be a good start, I feel. Coming back to climate change, I would say that although we say there is climate induced migration, climate has actually intensified the existing migration. So there has been a substantial level of migration from areas which are already vulnerable. People have been depending on nature-based livelihoods, and when the more we come to know about it, majority of the people are doing agriculture, but agriculture is not getting people money. Agriculture is not, they're not earning income from agriculture. Most of the people in many areas where we have been doing research in rural areas, their major source of income is non-agricultural daily wage labor, and this non-agricultural daily wage is hard to come by. So the only option for people for any catastrophic out-of-pocket expenditure is to either to borrow money from a moneylender or to migrate. So migration to urban areas will be much more substantial in the coming years, and I think we need to seriously think about ensuring the right to the city for migrants, taking into consideration of the ethnic issues, then the type of migration, whether it's forced migration or voluntary migration, then there are gender related concerns to be addressed. So it is very important to have people in source areas also different options so that they are able to take a considered decision whether or not to migrate. Even if they are not able to migrate, there should be option for them at native places, which currently I'm afraid are not there. I've been asking many experts about economies on what do you think is the future of livelihood for rural India, and most people do not have a solid answer about it. So I think also at the same time the source states, most of the states see migration as a problem, whereas some of us see migration as probably the only solution for it's actually migrating out of poverty, not just migrating from a place to. So I would conclude my reflections here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Binoy, for putting together why the right to the city doesn't actually really materialize, doesn't exist, it doesn't materialize. So we've been talking in the previous session, in this session, a lot about how people from scheduled caste categories migrate a lot more, are forced to migrate a lot more. Scheduled tribes also migrate a lot more. These are distress migration. But I think a lens that we've been missing is the gender lens to it. And I would request Professor Bhagat, maybe if you could reflect on, and both of you also, Divya and Dr. Binoy, on is there a gender aspect to migration and to how they are received in the city, as well as to also reflect on land relations when it comes to gender, because we have a patriarchal society, land is generally held by men. So including rural areas and urban areas in their translocal lives, how does gender relationship to land play a role?
I think you have raised very important question. Uh, Gender is also a form of inequality, uh, and how gender and patriarchy is sustained. If you look at people talk of various things, power, education, culture, etc. But at the heart of the gender, there is a concept of mobility and immobility. Right to mobile is a very important part of our capability. And mobility is the foundation of migration. This is the epistemological basis of migration. Mobility, including mobility within our household. What happens when we age, become old age? We are not mobile. We are dependent on somebody. Our mobility is somehow decimated. So what happens? How gender is constructed? You look at the mobility, right to mobile, or the mobility is part of the human capability. It's snatched through patriarchy. Then comes in our situation marriage migration, where you have to change the locality. It is not neo-local, it should be patri-local. You leave the parents' household, go to the husband's household. Another way of immobilizing, immobility. It is not restricted to only gender. It is, in our system, gender, caste, class, all are intersecting, overlapping. So what is caste? Caste should be looked from the, again, lens of the mobility and immobility. Who was mobile? If you see historically, the priestly class going to one place to another to serve the judgment. Trading community, the goods and services were produced and then the trading community was mobile, and that's how you find the surnames. And there are communities which are different parts of the country, and particularly in the cities. And the warrior class, mobile, going, invading, capturing. Who were not mobile? The traditional, the lower caste, what we call scheduled caste today. There was no right to mobile. They are tied to land. Similar type of situation by there in Europe, serfs. So what did capitalism do? Capitalism brought freedom. So if you see the mobility, once the mobility is provided, right to mobility, then how we can provide mobility? Education. What is education? If women are educated, what happens? They acquire the right to be mobile. Occupation, and then choice of marriage, partner. Now, all these are part of, I think, mobility, and then migration becomes, I think, one form where there is a change of residence. So this is what I like to say. Thank you.
Can I add? Yeah. So I think, Deepika, I think that's a very important dimension also to look at when we analyze, migration choices as well as the experiences of migration in migrants in cities. So at least in the rural areas in southern Rajasthan, where Ajivika Bureau has long-standing experience, even in the 15 years that I have been engaged in the source, we have seen changes in migration patterns, where earlier, migrants used to be predominantly single male, with the degradation of, rural livelihoods. For example, there's Mahi River, which gives, water for agriculture in Baswada district in southern Rajasthan. And Mahi ka pani has actually, dwindled over the years, because of which family migration has started to happen. So an area which earlier used to send single males to cities such as Ahmedabad and Surat in Gujarat, which is right across the border. It's a 4 5 hour bus ride. Now family women have also started to migrate, because earlier, when men used to migrate, women used to stay back and take care of the whatever little land holding. Even tribal households have a little bit of land holding in southern Rajasthan. So whatever little land there was, whatever little livestock there was, so of course, there is always this angle of triple burden on the women even when they're staying back. For example, taking care of productive kind of responsibilities, reproductive chores at the house, taking care of the elderly and the children at the same time because the husband is not there, and also negotiating with the public life in the rural areas, which they were not trained to do or not conditioned to do otherwise. So all that aspect is there, and now because of the dwindling sort of natural resource base, owing to climate change and other factors, they are having to migrate to cities, where again they have to participate in a very very compromised labor market. In as so in construction sector, for example, we see couples migrating as a jodi. So it's called the jodi system, where the husband and the wife are employed together by the same contractor, but payment is only made for 1.5 units of labor. A woman is not even considered as a full unit of labor. So we are talking about extremely unequal and extremely kind of unskilled, very suboptimal conditions of work, even at the destination for women, and paid to the male. Yeah, of course, the men get the payment in cash, and the woman does not even have access to the money itself. Plus, if they are construction workers and they're moving from one construction site to another, they're forced to reproduce that household very frugally, from one side to another. Like whatever little belongings they have to tie it up, move to the next site, and then they take care of firewood, find regular water for cooking, find an arrangement for children when they go along with the husband. So women are really impacted very very harshly, at both source and destination ends, and it's really made much more complicated now because of the intensification of climate change related factors that Binoy was also talking about.
I think there have been, Deepika, plus and minuses. In the rural areas, there is a feminization of agriculture when the men move to the city, single male migrants move to the cities. Now, when women move to the cities, they move as part of the family, and they move as a group to work in the garment sector or fish processing, etc. Or they are taken as individuals to work as domestic help, and so every type of migration has its own vulnerabilities. Say, for example, if a person goes as a domestic help from Jharkhand to Delhi to work in somebody's, she is totally, invisible to the systems, and will be working and living in somebody's house, and is highly vulnerable to all sort of exploitations, and even the wages will not be paid to her, maybe to an intermediary. So that's the sort of vulnerability some people have. And if it's a single woman with kids, it's very difficult to get a housing in destinations. And sometimes even women end up, having a partner, local partner, primarily for accommodation. Otherwise, accommodation is not given to women. So those sort of vulnerabilities are also there. Now, women who go as groups, they're actually confined mostly to their workplaces, and in the pretext of ensuring their safety. And so even moving, coming out from their workspace where they are also made to stay is very difficult for such workers. And but at the same time, it is actually a great opportunity for improved access to care if they are able to avail that care, because moving from rural areas to urban areas transforms the opportunity to access education, health care, and other services if people are able to avail these services. For example, in Kerala, in the university exams, a daughter of a migrant worker from Bihar was the topper. The yeah, and there are so many girls who were able to do very well in the academics, in the schools, and if they were at their native places, they probably would have been mothers of three or four. And many of them say, "We don't, please don't, make my family go back because I won't be able to continue my studies, and we'll have to quickly there will be a marriage, and we'll have to-" And mobility of women also stop with generally with the marriages. So even if there are so many young women who are actually liberated. So by moving to urban destinations, if they earn and they become they are also they become part of the decision making even at their native also, because they are an economic contributor. And I have seen a lot of girls, proudly strolling with the trolley, coming back from a garment factory which they have been working, taking a flight back to, and getting down in Ranchi. But these are isolated cases, and also there is this caste dynamics also playing in migration. What we've been observing is that if there is a high level of migration from the the advantageous caste, the proportion of female migration migrants will be much lesser compared to the Adivasis or Dalits. And the more such men migrate, the less they want their women to move. So and at the same time, it could also be distress, and it is also I mean, women from Adivasi communities if are seen to be migrating more compared to the OBCs or other, unless it is migration for education or for taking up this formal job. So it's a mix actually, but if it's safe, it provides a lot of opportunities to break the barriers related to gender, then caste, and women are able to access a lot of services, and it really helps people to accelerate their intergenerational social mobility.
I'm really loving how the three panelists have it seems like you're talking at three different levels to explain the same thing, and I appreciate how it is coming together and how to show that it is really complex, as there's not just one side to it, there are multiple facets to it. I wish we had a whiteboard where we could draw this. Between the three of you, the picture that you have drawn of gender is very interesting. I'm myself trained as a town planner. I have worked for several years understanding how do the land governance systems work, and I'm trying to continuously reflect as you're thinking on how our urban cities, the urban planning system particularly, can respond better to these to the way our city demography is changing. And Divya, you've put together in your introductory remarks a very good list of things that can be done, including, so the first thing is we enumerate, which Binoy also mentioned, that you enumerate, then you de-link it from tenure. But also coming from the rural experience and overall India's fascination with land is that we link it so much to our identity, of the identity of the communities. So then when it becomes a difficult question, so one is linked to the identity of the community. It is also linked very deeply to the question of domicile, like you mentioned, and it is the land ownership is linked, ownership particularly, not renting, is linked to who is defined as a citizen, particularly in an urban area. And it's very difficult to untangle this mess because land ownership is deeply entrenched into the systems of basic systems of how our cities and even our villages are structured. Do you have any radical solutions to address this? I know denumerate, enumerate and delete.
I think you have raised a lot of issues, and particularly uh, land rights, land relation. It has been part of the social structure traditionally, and it was part of status. Now it is getting monetized. There is a market for land. But one reality that is emerging in the country, that there is a growing landlessness, and also the size of land holding is extremely, extremely small, particularly this Gangetic Valley. So when we are talking about land rights, it's particularly more important for the tribal or the hilly areas where there was community rights or common property resources, and they are actually happening. How forces of urbanization is dispossessing people. So mining activity or construction activity or dams or etc. What one can use the phrase of some scholar, accumulation by disposition. Now, this leading to environmental degradation, this is leading to displacement, and of course, displacement is a forced migration. So, land, of course, important, but for large part of the rural area, I think land, the issue of land has very minimal importance. And if you look at what is they are getting in return in terms of output, sometimes farmers are at loss, negative, negative output or negative income. And you see the GDP, 14% GDP coming from agriculture. So somehow it is sustained, subsidized by the government, and that is how exclusion or citizenship rights become important. But then the solutions that are advanced, I think it has serious, serious limitation. What is solution? Increase farm output, increase income of the farmers. How can you increase income of the farmers by increasing the output, agricultural productivity? Where is the market? How much is the demand? If India is producing 350 million tons of food grains, and that is sufficient, if something 400 or 500 million tons are produced, what is going to happen? Is there a market? Over and above, there is a climate, weather related, etc. All these things, problems are there. So where is the solution? Solution is about not about land rights, space rights, not land relation, space relation. How to create a new types of space rights and space relations. It is through model of urbanization. Model of urbanization which is inclusive, which is transformative, which can give jobs to the farmers' sons and daughters. And there was a model, and we have been very half-heartedly using it. And that model, very simple, Pura, providing urban amenities to rural area by our former president, Abdul Kalam. But then this has been tweaked, this has been sidelined, marginalized, it became sectoral. Now it is called Syama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission. Now, what is that? How urbanization can become a means of rural development. How rural income you cannot increase unless urbanize. That's urban, but the model of urbanization, not the production of space, not the creation of wealth and inequality, but creating livelihood, income, but then transforming through urbanization. So urbanization has something very potential and transformative inherent character, and that is what is the agglomeration economies. Services cluster together and it creates agglomeration economy. Production becomes cheaper. If there is a bigger market. So therefore, how to urbanize in a sustainable and inclusive manner our vast area, whether you call it urbanization or call it development, but this is a spatial model. Pura is a spatial model of development, inclusiveness, safeguarding nature, etc. So this is how land rights to space rights to from land relation to spatial relation becomes very important.
I think there are certainly ways we improve the rights of migrants to the city. I mean, in our demographic advancement, the lessons from Japan, there is no one in Japan who would prefer to stay in rural Japan. So everybody is migrating to Osaka or Tokyo, and even in rural areas, there is a shortage of labor. So Japan has never been that open to migration, but they have been, actively looking at what are the ways people can be engaged from other countries. Now, states in the south are also on the verge of population related decline, at least in the Kerala is on the verge of a decline. There are two states where there is two districts with a negative growth rate. Now, this is also an opportunity for migrants, particularly our schools. In Kerala schools, there is very not even in schools. I think in even universities have a lot of seats vacant. Uh, I, it is also because of not just demographic advancement, it's also migration of youth to other places. But these also offer opportunities for people from other parts of the country to come work and avail the services, and there is also a diffusion of development. But what is required in these places, because of the sort of xenophobia people are experiencing, so to us who are practitioners who work on the ground, most of the challenges or problems faced by the migrants cannot be addressed by intervening with migrants, but with the receiving societies. So most of the people who exploit in terms of wages or providing housing or discriminating are not migrants but people from the receiving societies. So our interventions need to focus on these people, including the town planners, I would say, to sensitize them on how important or how vital a role migrants play in a city, and how the city or the urban centers are more dependent on migrant workers than the migrants depending on a city. So they have the options of going to the other cities. So that's why in the during the lockdown, uh, the Karnataka chief minister or many states reached out to South State, can we send people to work. So it is the cities do not realize how desperate the cities are, or how desperate they have, or how acute is the labor shortage, and how it is a win-win for not just the cities but also for the migrants, and it substantially even contributes to the adaptation to climate change in the source areas, not just in the case of the households from which there are migrants, but there is a cascading impact on the entire village economy by the utilization of the remittances. So I think we need to seriously intervene to change, transform the receiving societies to appreciate and recognize the right of the migrants. And this particularly is important in the case of the urban local bodies, where from the newly elected representatives to the bureaucracy, or even residents associations who say migrants we need for work, but they shouldn't be residing in our area. So these have to change, and then obviously it will have a cascading impact on everybody.
Thank you. We'll now open for questions. If you have any questions.
Well, so quite a good number of issues have been discussed. Most of these issues are actually widely discussed for the past 2-3 decades. Now, how to theorize and how to find ways to help these migrants is the key issue. Now, in fact, we have been talking about caste class nexus in the context of migration and migrant workers. You can broadly classify them as forced or what I would call the distress induced migrants. The second one is voluntary and what I would call them the prosperity induced migrants. While the prosperity induced migrants or voluntary migrants are welcome into the cities and they are absorbed into the urbanization process, the other ones, whom I call distress induced migrants, are forced for the sake of seeking jobs and seeking livelihoods. When they come in, they are not wanted. Therefore, they are neglected, they are denied access, and therefore they have to seek asylum of staying somewhere wherever they get space. Okay, it could be some polluted river banks or whatever, or all neglected places. People cannot stay, which means their living space, the per capita living space, is 3 square feet, 4 square feet, 10 people in 100 square feet. You know what their living conditions are. And who really contributes to global warming induced climate change? Not these guys, the other ones, because they want big living space, parking space for their cars or their industries, all over, everything else. While the other one is considered the rich, considered the contributors to the GDP, what you call the GDP, the other ones are not contributors to the GDP. Is it true? Is it how we really recognize them? Is it right? Is it humane approach? I would say no, not at all. The other ones, the most neglected, are more vibrantly contributing to GDP by giving the labor force. Suppose there is a disaster in a city due to urban flood. Who contributes to urban mitigation? Who contributes? Who gives relief to the rich from the flood mitigation, from the flood disaster? It is these workers who are already most vulnerable and affected due to climate change are the ones who really help them out in giving them the relief from the flood or any other disaster. So how do you theorize this? I would think that there are institutions. There are 4 categories. I give, distribute, I divide the whole society into 4 categories. One is the institution. This institution's role is to formalize, institutionalize the rich and the migrants. Okay, their encroachments are formalized, the land grab is formalized, everything is formalized. And the other one is market, which facilitates, absorbs them. So there is a nexus between institutions and the market. The third category, I would say, is the activists, researchers, the people who really may create noises, people like us. We are all part of that group. We are noise makers. Put 1 step forward and 2 steps backward. Some people get absorbed into the system also. The fourth category are called the fatalists. These fatalists are the real poor, distress-induced, involuntary, who contributes to disaster mitigation, workers, most neglected. Now, this is a situation when every bit of the investment on urban infrastructure or industrial development or whatever is not helping them but exploit the labor services. How do you help? This is how we theorize. What is the way out?
I entirely agree with you, and I add what you have said. A little bit I like to differ with you also. These migrants are actually city makers. We shouldn't call them migrants, they are city makers. I also made a statement. Tell me any city which is not made by migration or migrants, whether New York or Mumbai or Tokyo. Cities are the products of migration. But then where is the native comes into? So this this point I have told earlier also. So they are actually the city makers. Now, distress migration. It now at the moment, from what I see, this concept is doing lot of harm, distress migration. When we say distress migration, we have an imagination. What is that imagination? Somebody who is hungry in the village, they boards the train, comes into Mumbai. No longer it is true. It may be true in 60s and 70s, where there were open spaces in Mumbai where they can put a hut or tenement and live. Each and every parcel of land is well guarded. So who is migrating? Somebody is migrating from rural area, maybe a distress or something like that, how we define, but not a person who is hungry, who has lost everything, who has some agency, who has some network, who has some aspiration. That yes, I cannot accept 200 rupees in Manrega. I want to earn 400 and 500 rupees. And then they come here, there is a network. Migration is driven by network. Without network, somebody coming alone or few family and just living in the pavement, after few months, they will die. So it's maybe mortality and morbidity that will take over. So this is the distress migration to be seen. So these people who are there in the city, driven by agency, driven by aspirations, they are marginalized. What you said correct. They are actually creating the wealth, and this, and then who is appropriating the wealth? And that's why the concept of right to city, what Vinay has raised, and that is very important. And right to city means the local democracy. Now, democracy, how to strengthen democracy, that is the issue. That is the fundamental issue. And cities are something that the boundaries are created by human being. When we say, oh, lot of density, lot of people are there, how we define city? Cities are actually the spaces, there is no boundary. When we municipalize, we draw the boundary, we say, oh, this is the city. So that's the concept of city. City is an expanding spaces. There is no boundary. Is the administrative and political processes that create the city. And then people come into the relationship with the state, and the state has a responsibility. So the point I am telling you, there is no democracy comes in a nation when there is a democracy from the below. And then who owns the city? It is very well connected with right to the city. Who owns the city? These people own the city who are marginalized. So actually the local democracy is very, very important. And now it is time to think the importance of city, not only in economic growth, but it is in the political process. Let me also tell you, the nation is born in the cities. If you look at historically, our ancient republic, or whether also the republic in Greece, Athens, Sparta, or our in Vaisali we have the Birjis and Lichvis, the ancient republics. There were cities, and then cities were very important. And it is city, citizenship, civilization. If you see the word, so actually cities are very important where citizens are produced. How we make citizen? So we are not able to make citizen because they are deprived of education, they are deprived of access to healthcare, and of course the migrants are the most marginalized group of people. So this is now the larger question of citizenship, how we build city, and for that local democracy is very important. And to begin with, 74th Amendment to the Constitution should be implemented letter and spirit in spite of failures. There may be failure, there may be something very bad happening, but that doesn't mean that the essentially 74th Amendment is wrong or some problem is there. It is something that one has to, and it has started, but it has not started with full force.
with that, we'll close this particular session because we are quite late for lunch. Thank you to all three of you, Professor Bhagat, Divya, Dr. Binoy. Thank you for putting together your thoughts. And most importantly, I would like to thank ILDC for giving us the platform so that we could discuss these ideas. And thank you for being a wonderful audience. If you have any burning questions, we request you to please approach the panelists during lunch.